Brut, New Art on Stage.
Welcome to the 11th edition of Gesellschaftsspiele, The Art of Assembly, this time with the title Architectures of Hospitality. My guests are Merve Bedir, Benjamin Foerster-Baldenius from Raumlabor Berlin, and Marina Otero Verzier. This edition is based on a live event at Brut Theater in Vienna on November 20th, 2021, in co-production with the Goethe Institute and its program Performing Architecture. My special thanks for this collaboration to Susanne Traub, and once again and again to Brut Theater and the whole team. The Art of Assembly is a nomadic series of lectures and conversations on the potential of gatherings in art, activism, and politics. If you missed the past episodes, you might want to check out our website, art-of-assembly.net, where you find videos of the lectures, podcasts, and other material. My name is Florian Malzacher. I'm a curator and writer and the host of the series. Well, after having touched upon quite a few aspects of assemblies in our past editions, today we want to focus on the role of architecture and infrastructure for assemblies. So what kind of spatial arrangements allow what kind of gatherings? How is hospitality? How is radical democracy designed? When I browse in my mind through the images that were presented in this series so far, I think there were mainly two kinds of spatial arrangements prevalent. Very formal ones, like assembly architectures designed by states and tradition, like courtrooms, parliaments, etc. And these are also the very ones that are often quoted or even copied in artistic works dealing with assembly. And then there are the gatherings that often take place in whatever space is available or at stake, the assemblies of activist movements, of occupations, on squares, in squatted factories, in theater foyers, behind barricades even. Their preferred form is, if possible, the circle. But sometimes the sheer number and or the limitations of space prevent any specific order. So all of these spatial arrangements represent also certain hierarchies, or want to avoid them. Sometimes they just might hide them. And they create borders. Even the broadest circle has its limits. And be it just that certain physical and mental abilities are needed to join in, or that the lack of proximity makes hearing and being heard impossible. The architectural approaches we will look at today are in one way perhaps somewhere in the middle of these two types of spatial settings. And at the same time, they try to position themselves outside of them. So on one hand, because they question, analyze, criticize the way assemblies are facilitated. And on the other hand, because they want to offer different options. And they do this with often, I would say, a pragmatic approach to utopias. The prism through which we will look at these architectures today is the one of hospitality. And it will show that hospitality, with all its seeming generosity, is quite a complex concept. Who is invited into our societies, our assemblies? What are the relationships between guests and hosts? Is unconditional hospitality possible or even desirable? Well, talking about hospitality in the arts is basically impossible without referring to Derrida, so I will do so as well, because he offers a paradoxical view and a non-fixed solution. As he writes, hospitality begins usually with a question. What is your name? How should I call you? And this question shows already the whole dilemma, because these are questions of care, of affection. Derrida mentions that this is a question we often ask a kid when we meet it the first time. What is your name? But these are as well questions of the law. By identifying the foreigner, they propose a pact. They create a legal subject. As Derrida says, quote, is it more just and more loving to question or not to question? End of quote. So there is the law of hospitality that is unconditional, and there are the laws of hospitality in plural that, for example, also put duties on the guests. And it would be easy to say, yes, we want unconditional hospitality, but as Derrida says, this would be just abstract, utopian, illusory. And of course, it gets even more complex when one considers the etymologic proximity of the concept guest, stranger, host, ghost, and enemy in Old Greek. But I guess for us tonight, it is enough to just keep in mind that hospitality has a utopian potential as well as its pitfalls. And we will have the chance to talk about this after we gathered some material with which we now begin. I'm very happy to introduce Marina Otero Verzier. Marina is Director of Research at Het Nieuwe Institute and Head of the MA in Social Design at Design Academy Eindhoven. Alongside the direction of research projects and curation of exhibition at Het Nieuwe Institute since 2015, Marina has been a curator at the Shanghai Art Biennial in 2021, curator of the Dutch Pavilion at the Venice Architectural Biennial in 2018, and chief curator of the 2016 Oslo Architecture Triennial. And she has co-edited many books, of which I just want to mention the most recent ones: Lithium from 2021, More Than Human 2020, Unmanned Architecture and Security series from 2016 to 20, and Architectures of Appropriation from 2019. Marina, I'm very happy you're here and hand over the microphone to you.
Thank you so much for the invitation and also for the introductions. And very happy to be here today in person to have this conversation. So thank you for coming, and also to the ones that are online. Indeed, I was asked about architectures of hospitality, and I have decided to reflect on the question more broadly. In many ways, I will continue reflecting on what Florian has mentioned. Derrida will be very present, although not necessarily quoted directly. And I will talk about things that I have experimented with in very particular projects, but I think we can refer to those projects later in the conversation if needed and if there is some curiosity about it. So, what is an architecture of hospitality? I will say, imagine a door. When a stranger appears at your door, feed him for 3 days before asking who he is, where he's come from, where he's headed, writes poet Naomi Shihab. That way, she continues, he will have strength enough to answer. Or by then you will be such good friends that you don't care. In the Arab world, the stranger's right to protection and shelter has been honored since time immemorial. Imagine a room past that door. El salón o la sala de visitas, the visits room, the front room in a Spanish house, is used for formal social events, for receiving guests. It is a buffer zone between the public and the private area within the house. It's a room well furnished and decorated with care, not really used during normal family life, and reserved for hosting the guests. Imagine a table inside the room past the door. Leaving an empty chair at the Christmas table is a popular Polish tradition, an extra chair for an unexpected visitor. If someone actually knocks on the door, the stranger, the other, the foreigner, the guest, the host should feed them and give them shelter. Tables, rooms, doors are architectures of hospitality, architectures for welcoming the stranger or the guest, yet ones that assume that the stranger has a place where to return, that assume that the host belongs and has the right to belongings, to property, that assume that the host owns the space that the stranger doesn't. And let's be honest, idea that someone can actually own a space, a table, a room, a plot of land, a country, a world. Architecture sustains this crazy belief by drawing lines that define insides and outsides, minds and yours. Architecture sustains this crazy, fascinating belief that creates property lines and defines what is appropriate, that defines a host and a guest, and the laws that orchestrate the relations between them. And it is fascinating that we believe so profoundly and act upon such a fiction because there are not hosts and guests, I will argue. We are in fact hosting each other in a radical architecture of hospitality. But let's for a moment go back to the door, the room, and the table. If you're an architect, you imagine these figures in a space through the frame of the Cartesian grid. We are trained to do so. Doors, rooms, tables are situated in time and space as part of a spatial coordinate system. And even if you are not an architect, you can't escape the system. It has ordered the world and its doors, rooms, tables, insides and outsides. Let's think of the grid, of this grid. This coordinate system, published in 1637 in Discourse on Method, was one of René Descartes' most important legacies. It specifies the position of any point or object on a surface using intersecting axes as measuring guides. An apparently neutral method of categorization, the grid, the Cartesian grid, serves to draw, calculate, optimize, standardize, replicate, and ultimately to control a space. The grid rationalizes, organizes the world laying regular lines. The grid designs. It's in itself that amount of design, of architectural design. The grid not only organizes a space, also relations. It serves to objectify identity and categorization. Let's think further of the grid, of the lines that divide spaces and beings. The Cartesian grid goes hand in hand with the Cartesian theory of the animal machine. That is, Descartes referred to machines as the models to explain the functioning of organisms. Animals were equated to machines. They were equated to bodies without sound and reason. Humans, or rather Western man, then became a unique superior being, a universal rational subject, one entitled to landscape resources and others being's domination. Western man then became a host. Entangled in the space we inhabit, Cartesian dualisms, inside-outside, up and down, man-animal, sustain the compartmentalization and instrumentalization of relations. They hold especism, define and discriminate entities, bodies and identities, make gendered and raised bodies. Cartesian dualisms, epitomizing the grid, sustain the conditional notions of hospitality. They stimulate the human's crudest ambitions, the ambitions that drove the mechanical age and the formation of capitalism, the dreams of mastery of space and time, of territory and resources, at the expense of ethical and ecological awareness. Cartesian dualisms make hospitality conditional. The grid sells a form of pragmatism, Dutch, American, whatever pragmatism, that equates hospitality with democratic life. Yet an idea of democracy that respects the difference of individuals and communities, generally in the spirit of tolerance and quotas instead of mutual care. The grid prevents unconditional hospitality. It has sustained and kept sustaining property, ownership, privileges, categories, borders. The grid supports extractivism. It is actually the blueprint of colonial plantations and cash books. It constructs distinction and categories that delineate what is alive and what is lifeless. It sees commodities where there are living beings. It sees non-life in the place of living ecosystems. Think of the grid. The grid is ubiquitous. It permeates spaces, extends past the door, any door. Yet the grid doesn't bring commonality. Its bare assertive lines produce differential social spaces. Inside, outsides, in and outs, up and downs, in the room, at the table, spaces that facilitate or prevent the encounter of bodies. The the grid is ubiquitous. It permeates spaces, extends past the door, any door, yet it sells the idea that it is possible, rightful and appropriate, to enclose a space. It validates the fiction that someone can actually own a space. It constructs the historical position of landlord and host. When you no longer see it, when you no longer see the grid, it's because it has grown inside. From the inner, it creates an aesthetic and repressive experience, an illusion of order and legibility. An ontological version of the world so perfected that it seems inevitable. Isn't it beautiful, the grid? Within the grid, behind the door, in the room, at the table, holding to our discrete individual body, we are captive of the fear of the unknown. To the fear of the foreigner, the stranger, the ghost, the parasite, the other. Yet the body is multiple, the seat and the room are never empty, and the door can't be fully closed. Past the door, in the room, at the table, imagine a body, your body. Liberal humanism presents the notion that individuals are autonomous, discrete, self-contained, ontologically separate islands. Yet we are porous entities, accommodating and kept alive by microbes, bacteria, fungi, all central to the maintenance and the healthy body of our body and their body. Being human is a multi-species achievement dependent on corporeal hospitality. Bodies enact radical hospitality, one that questions the category of human. The body, subjected to Cartesianism, to categorization, it is actually an architecture of exceeding categories. Past the door, in the room, at the table, imagine a body, your now multiple body, next to other bodies, breathing bodies. In breathing, bodies inhale and host each other across times and spaces. In breathing, we create interdependencies between bodies and bodies at the atmosphere. It is not a being next to others, but being with and in others, alterity within the self. What is an architecture of hospitality, of radical hospitality, you ask? One in which we host each other in a radical welcome, an architecture of permeable, erotic bodies and collapsed times and spaces, an architecture that questions modernity, that challenges how modernity educates to know, describe, and categorize the world, that invites immeasurability and exceeding categories, human, non-human, up and down, inside, outside, now and then, mine and yours. Now, let's go back to the empty chair. Past the door, in the room, at the table, next to your now multiple body, an empty chair. Some historians argue that the empty chair that the Poles leave at the table is reserved for those who passed away. The Spanish Sala de Visitas was also the place where the recently deceased were placed before their funeral. Ghosts, the dead, the ancestor, the spirits, are woven in the fabric of the daily life and architecture, being often considered equal and rightful inhabitants of spaces around the world. They have sometimes a reserved seat, an altar, a corner, a room, a home. Their presence challenges ideas of linearity of time and progress. Ghosts are also at the center of stories of decolonization, confrontations between colonialists who believe in the right to dominate and control, and indigenous peoples, the lands and spirits that resist domination, struggles between the order imposed by the grid and the mysterious hostility and unholy experience with which ghosts haunt the colonizer, mind, plans, orders, categories, and worlds. We don't own anything, we are part of everything. A being and becoming with spirits, ancestors, and Mother Earth, explains indigenous leader Ronaldo Humire. Ghosts are the other, the stranger, neither present nor absent, neither dead nor alive. They are who fracture all traditional conceptions of temporality. And in doing so, the position of the host and the guest collide into an instance that contains all past, present, and future instances, creating an encounter where laws of hospitality are no longer valid, where laws and rights of property and ownership are no longer relevant, where the laws of hospitality and property are overshadowed by the respect to and the rights of past, present, and future generations. In this space, now referring to Lucy Garay's work, is where we care to speak to each other without taking each other's breath away. What is an architecture of radical hospitality, you ask? A non-Cartesian architecture, one difficult to describe under dual categories, one that grows in predictable environments, a relation between space, matter, and organisms, one that morphs slowly and melds Platonic solids, geometries, lines, doors, rooms, and tables inside, outside, minds, and yours. A porous and indeterminate architecture, and yet one capable of dismantling the boundaries that fictiously enclose the world, body, home, nation. A space of radical welcome where historical categories of host and guest are dismantled, where welcoming is not only the labor of gender-racialized, precarious bodies, where we are intimately connected to our own and other vulnerability. A space where we overcome mutual fear and distrust. What is an architecture of radical hospitality, you ask? A political space where we find and inhale each other, where is the possibility of being changed by the other, opening up to previously unconceivable futures. An architecture of radical hospitality is a non-disciplined architecture, one that demands the architecture canon to be put aside. It doesn't suggest that the canon has to be erased or forgotten, just perhaps acknowledged as serving interests that are no longer pertinent, too often constructed by means that are not only outdated, but no longer ethically or ecologically tolerable. Open doors, guest rooms, and empty chairs are just not enough. This is, I will argue, not the time for hosts or masters arguing for their right or domination and ownership. The adoption of humility, even vulnerability, is a political position. It is perhaps the position that challenges the Cartesian postulates, the grid, that has guided architecture and its dreams of infinite progress, that challenges the white masculine subject that sees the world as his own possession, and that has been too long at the core of architecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marina. And now I would like to introduce Benjamin Foerster-Baldenius from Raumlabor Berlin. Benjamin founded in 1999 the Institut für angewandte Baukunst in Berlin, and since then also works with Raumlabor Berlin on the culture of the city and public space. He plans, draws, and realizes installations and interventions in public space, makes scenographies and dramaturgies for stages, squares, and exhibitions, and develops event and teaching formats. Most recently, he realized the Floating University, whose association he has chaired since 2018. He has worked for numerous festivals and theaters. Amongst them, I just want to mention very egoistically Steirische Herbst Festival, because that's where we collaborated several times, for example, for the Truth is Concrete event in 2012. Benjamin was professor at several universities, and of course I have to mention that in 2021, Raumlabor Berlin was awarded the Golden Lion at the Architectural Biennial in Venice. Thank you, Benjamin, for joining, and the microphone is yours.
I'm also glad that I'm here. It's good. I haven't been in Vienna for a while, and I'm glad to be in a space with other people and that we can talk now. I won't take the last sentence of the speaker before me too literal. Otherwise, I would have to sit down again. But I try not to describe what I'm describing as if I'm in the middle of it. I mean, I'm in the middle of it, of course, because I'm talking mostly about my work. But I hope that you can see at least the attempt to find a solution and to see myself as part of the problem. The first invitation that I had to this was about the architecture of assembly, and then it somehow shifted to hospitality, which of course is an aspect. And then I thought about this, and I thought about the aesthetics. That's the first thing that I think of when the term architecture is being used. Like, what are the aesthetics of the architecture of hospitality? And if you think of that, it's far too often looks like that, right? We don't really know what this is. Could be a fairground, or could be a welcome center for refugees, or it could be a temporary airport annex, or it could be a sports facility or whatever. But no. In this case, it's the G28 summit meeting place, and so it's a place where a lot of people come and that don't live in the city of Glasgow, and they're being welcomed here in spaces that are artificially ventilated with a very, very high output of CO2, and you wonder how in these halls that don't even have windows, you can talk about the climate, which is it's a very strange situation, I think, and if I think about places that where I would expect a certain, the places where guests are coming today, like border control situations, or let's talk about the border between the European Union and Belarus at the moment. Where is the architecture of hospitality? Airports where people arrive, they just look like that. Hospitals are not particularly welcoming in any way, even though they are for hospitality. And so it's in a sense we are more, if we look at the precise outcomes of these architectures that should be symbolically welcoming people, it's more hostility than hospitality that you approach. So I was thinking about this is it's a bit like here, right? We're also in a black box. We don't have windows. We're sitting. I'm standing in front of you. You're sitting there on the chairs. We have a very traditional kind of panel here. We're not sitting in a circle, but still we know that we have other forms of exchange. Hopefully, when that's an interesting information. I'll leave it for a moment. But then I thought, like, okay, when I'm not a theorist, right? I'm really in a way more an architect. I make projects, mostly with people that I like, and I try to do the best to get aware of these kind of situations and change them. And sometimes you come to buildings where everything is solved already. This is, for example, I was allowed to work in this building for a year as a professor for transdisciplinary design at the Volkwang University in Essen. This is the Sana building at the Zeche Zollverein, and it is a fucking great building. If you ever get the chance to go there, go inside and spend a day in it, and it's hilarious. When you go inside, the windows that go to all directions, that kind of frame the outside, frame like everything that's happening out there. The weather becomes a dramatic movie, and also of course the post-industrial landscape becomes a great scenery for whatever is happening inside. When I was allowed to work there, the space was completely empty because for some reason the Volkwang University didn't, at least the teachers, they didn't want to work there because it was too far out, and they would rather work in the old 70s university building in the middle of the city. And also the students, there was only one tramway, only goes every 20 minutes, and you have to go back by 8 o'clock because then the last tramway is going. So nobody wanted to work there. But I decided that we have to now kind of take a certain kind of ownership over that space. And the first thing that we did with the students was we opened up a kitchen and we invited people like Florian, for example, was there, actors of some kind of urban change of the Ruhr area. And there's lots of them, lots of interesting people, and we made it a kind of a space where we can invite people, and that is and of course it was a super good space to start with, because the space already is a great space to invite people to, and then if you give them food, everybody's coming, and you don't even have to worry about, that normally in these kind of positions you don't have money to pay people to invite them. So, but if you say, my students have cooked, do you want to come? It works quite well. And then you can have a talk that goes quite far, and it's very intimate, and the students really get interested in what the people that we together decided to invite have to say. So, and then we started filling up the space with these kind of crates and boxes, and started playing around with it, and deal with questions of how can we negotiate space. The reason why we started with this was that we had a collaboration in mind with another university, the University of Political Science in Paris, where Bruno Latour is teaching in a small group of students in a kind of institute that he called SPIP, the Sciences Po Experimentation in Art et Politique, so the Art and Politics Experimentation Studio, and they were preparing an event that should happen a couple of weeks before the climate summit in Paris, and the idea of it was, of course, if everybody knows Bruno Latour, that this is a summit that is in a way a pre-enactment. Florian talks about it extensively in his presentation talk for the Art of Assembly also, so I don't have to explain every detail in it, but the idea was to invite 300 or more students, mostly of political science, that take over a certain kind of role in the summit, either a nation state, of course, or something that is also, or an entity that is somehow affected by climate change. So, and what we were doing was that we were trying to figure out what kind of spaces does it need to make a positive outcome for a climate summit. Of course, it's quite difficult to design a space that supports a positive outcome of a conference, but we were addressing it. And the good thing about it was that the event was about to happen in a marvelous theater that also, in a way, looks a bit like it's a very neutral space. It's a bit like an industrial hall, but it's the Le Théâtre des Amandiers in Nanterre, in the outskirts of Paris, and it has a space that you see on the photo that has a huge Scheunentor, a huge door that you can open up to the outside. And together with Philippe Ken, who was the director of the theater at that time, and working with Bruno Latour, we decided to take advantage of that. And so within this thing where all these students came and they took over a role, like one group was talking for the forest or for the oceans or for certain drowning nations or stones and so on. And with this guy, we decided on a set of objects, and you can see them already in the photos, these tables that appear in different shapes that can also be used as blackboards on one side, so you can adapt and use everything that is there, and they can be pushed around, and they can be assembled in different kind of, however you think the present situation in these 5 days summit needs it. You can rearrange it and come together in different forms. So either, there's these smaller groups where people come together, and there's bigger groups where everybody is discussing together with each other, where everybody needs a computer and so on. And what you can already see in the back, the door opens, and the climate can also come in and become a part of the conference. So you feel if it's cold or if it's warm, and you can actually, the climate invades the conference. And that was super good experience, because I don't know if this was the reason why this pre-enactment of the climate summit actually worked out with a positive outcome, but I hope so. I come to next, and there was audience, of course, as well. Some more photos. And here you can see it from the outside. That's the door closed, and here it's open. So, from time to time, it opened up, and whenever there was a decision that couldn't be taken, the chimney made a little dance. And the way that we developed it was with this game that we put up in the workshop of the theater, where together with all the people that were preparing it, we kind of pre-enacted the pre-enactment and tried to figure out what kinds of spatial protagonists we need to have this positive outcome. Right. This is this. It's also super good. It's the only French theater that actually has a workshop. Most theaters don't have. I mean, no, they just have very, very tiny workshops. In this case, you can build up the whole stage like in a German theater. The other aspect that I want to talk about is that I experienced that actually to have this contact with the outside world is super important. In this case, we see the Fondation Suisse of Le Corbusier, and I think what is super great about it is the entrance of the building. So you enter the building, and you can sit outside the building, and it's the only social space that the building has is actually underneath the building, between these columns. And then you enter this little box on the right, and there's just a small kind of foyer and a small room that is big enough to have a big piano and a Le Corbusier painting on the wall. The only problem that they had when they wanted to make a party for the 75th anniversary of the building, and that was in November, and they wanted to invite the Swiss ambassador and have a classical music concert, was that they didn't have a space to make that party. So what we proposed to them was that we use this space outside underneath the so-called piloti, the lower, and make this kind of very thin, permeable skin around it and use that as a temporary party location. Well, it was wasn't really a party. It was more like an official event. And that worked quite well. And this, of course, if you know Raumlabor's work, is a format that we work a lot with. We have these vans that are traveling through the countryside or around cities that have these kind of huge plastic bags inside that can be blown up as a space where you can come together. What we experience with this is through the transparency of the space, that you can be outside seeing the people inside, and you can be inside seeing the people outside. But still there's this it is still a protected space, that there is a certain magic about it, and there's a certain wish to become part of it and go inside, because you see what's inside and you want to see what it looks like from the inside looking outside. And it's also a great space to be in. And so this is a very good working model. And the kitchen monument, the other one was the space cluster. The kitchen monument is still now, I think, for 15 years touring around Europe and still being invited somewhere. It's more the problem that we are architects and we would like to do something new, and that people all want the old thing, and we are not renting out beer tents. So we always look very precisely on who is inviting us, of course. And what we're doing with these objects is we started becoming curators of what's going on in there, and actually we found out that by looking more at the social practice that is happening, makes completely sense, because then suddenly the architecture can be seen through completely different eyes, and you can and you find out that actually space is not only made by this, by these whatever walls and ceilings and floors, and even if it's a funny space like that, but that it's actually made by social interaction. So and that's what we are working on still at the moment, and here comes the floating university, where we're trying to expand that and experiment even more with the different spaces of social interaction, where we have like a lecture room with a pool in the middle where people can put their feet, and you can also have a drink, or you can smoke a cigarette if you want, or and then there's dragonflies passing through the lecture hall, and you hear dogs barking, and then eventually there's other things happening. Why is that photo coming? That's funny. That's Jonah Friedman. Jonah, what are you doing here? But Jonah Friedman is a cool reference. I don't know if you know him, but he just died last year. Jonah Friedman is an architect who all his life was dealing with the question of how do people live together, how do they come together, and what kind of spaces are needed. And his apartment was during the past probably 50 years one of the spaces of the most hospitality that I can imagine. He always invited everybody into his apartment, and you could see his work in his apartment. You could wander around his apartment with him inside and look at everything that's there, and take out whatever you wanted and discuss the architecture of cohabitation, more or less, with him. And I skipped this one. Wait a minute. I don't talk about this project now. I go to the next one, because I just talk about the floating university now. Okay? Because it's getting too long. A white, middle-aged European man shouldn't talk so long. So So floating university is it's this space that's in the middle of the rainwater collection basin of the Tempelhof Airport in the middle of Berlin, 2 minutes from the subway, and the space was completely unknown until we managed to open up the door, because it's an infrastructure of the city, and nobody was allowed to actually enter. So we made this proposal that this is an infrastructure that is actually that can be used for something else, and I still don't know how it happened that somebody gave us a key. I know how it happened that we had funding for it, because it came from the German Cultural Foundation, because it was the 100-year Bauhaus anniversary, and it kind of fit into that program. And then we were able to build this campus into this basin that is eventually flooded from time to time, but not always. And thank you. I'm almost there. And then we invited all kinds of people, artists, but also groups of universities, neighbors, kids from the neighborhood, schools, to simultaneously start using the space for whatever kind of learning situation they needed. This is Ton Maton. And this is a group from Colombia that just built a bicycle race track that they're sitting on having a beer with a floating university in the back. This is a group of the Kids University making a survey in the mud, looking at all the dirt that's been spilled in and inventing stories about it, talking about it. And this is a young group of students making a performance in front of the audience. And all these things are happening at the same time, so they're kind of it's really a space where cross-pollination is happening, and it's also, and that's maybe where it comes to hospitality. It's inviting you to take part in something and to also look at something that normally would happen behind closed doors. So that's the good thing of things happening outside, I think, on the street, that you don't have to, you don't have to be 2G plus to enter a space and then go through one door and another door and then a curtain, and then you come into a space and there's something interesting happening. But you can actually go there with no reason at all, without paying any money, and become a part of a lecture by Dirk Becker, philosopher, sociologist, talking about systemic philosophy, and or see whatever kind of exhibition the kids are doing, or a performance by students from The Hague, and I don't know if there's a point. I don't think there's a point there. Maybe that's good, so that we can discuss.
Thanks a lot, Benny. And now our last speaker for today is Merve Bedir, and I'm very happy you're here. Merve is an architect based in Rotterdam and Istanbul. Her ongoing research examines infrastructures of hospitality and mobility, and by this is also one of the reasons why we talk today about hospitality. And a second line of research follows the human and non-human relationships in the context of ecology and cybernetics. She's the co-founder of A Formal Academy, an experimental school program at Pearl River Delta region, and a founding member of Mutfak workshop, focusing on kitchen as a cultural space in Gaziantep, and a founding member of the Center of Spatial Justice in Istanbul. Merve holds a PhD from Delft University of Technology and has taught at several universities. And she also has curated several shows. I just mentioned the ones that was also inspiring for today's topic, Vocabulary of Hospitality in Istanbul 2015. Most recently, her work Unsettled Urbanism was exhibited in Matadero, Madrid in 2020, and in Venice Architectural Biennial's main exhibition with this year. And I'm very happy to say that this, next to Raumlabor's part of this exhibition, was one of the very few presentations that I actually also personally found very inspiring. Another recent work, which is in relation to our talk today, I suppose, is Floor Table, which will be presented by the Smithsonian Design Museum next year. And Merve participated in numerous important biennials, exhibitions, etc., and also wrote extensively for several magazines. Tonight you will talk about hospitality and the politics of the floor table. Thank you for joining.
I start with a big thank you to Florian, and also big thank you to Annika and the whole team at Brut for making this evening possible, and especially to Annika for everything that she has done for me throughout these 3-4 days. I really have to acknowledge that several times. I will be speaking from my gut, so bear with me. I will try to keep it at 15 minutes. And I will... Actually, maybe before I start, I want to kind of point out a couple of things that I found super interesting in Marina's and Benny's talks, and which I think could also gives me a space to add on, and also during the discussion could be interesting. So the one thing, for instance, was about the question of can a space be neutral at all? The other one was about, that came up in Marina's talk about breathing, and in Benny's talk as the climate inviting the conference, thinking in this case this key transversal agent that could enable radical hospitality. And then the other one that was common in both talks, which was super interesting, is about the porosity of the border and the boundary. And then the last one, which again was interesting from the two talks, is about the cross-pollination at Floating School. Creating the space where we can be hosting each other. So actually taking the word form rather than the noun form, hosting, continuous hosting, which was brought up by Marina. So from there, actually, there is not much for me to talk. They have already mentioned so many things that are very interesting and important that should be brought up in this topic. And again, I'm a little bit guilty of the evening for having, for the project Vocabulary of Hospitality. And actually with that, if I may start with a mention and with an acknowledgement of my friends and collaborators in Turkey, in Gaziantep, a city on the Turkish side of the border with Syria, who are very much the agents and the subjects of this talk that I will be delivering, but who wouldn't be able to be here due to the European border regimes and the Frontex policing, and who would be illegalized, who are illegalized from their freedom of movement, from their right to freedom of movement. So it's a privilege to be speaking here. So I want to start with acknowledging that. And this also brings me to the research, to the work that I've been working on, that I've been in since 2013-14 in some ways. The notion of hospitality actually started from the research, doing research on hospitality. This idea started from this very notion to host someone, to be guest to someone, or the idea of hospitality. Who owns the right to hospitality? It's something that came up a lot. In the government's language against migrants, the hospitality of the state, the hospitality of the nation state, the hospitality of the government, the hospitality of policy, and it was literally used this way: how hospitable, how good hosts we are as nation or as state, that we are opening our doors. And in reality, when we think about it, it's actually a complete appropriation and confiscation of the term and all its all meanings, and to kind of also try to hijack and hide the embedded violence in it, right? So it's actually very violent, the term hospitality, if we think about it that way. I mean, how can you, for instance, even if you go back to the Greek city-state, again, something that Marina exemplified very nicely, after 3 days, you are not a guest anymore. You have to learn the language, you have to obey the rules of the state that you are knocking on the door of. So after 3 days, you need to abide the rules of the state. So you're not necessarily a citizen, but you are still subject to the rules of the state. So here comes my obligatory quotation from Derrida for tonight. So he says, "The foreigner is first of all foreign to the legal language in which the duty of hospitality is formulated. The right to asylum, its limits, norms, policing, etc. He has to ask for hospitality in a language which, by definition, is not his own, the one imposed on him by the master of the house, the host, the king, the lord, the authorities, the nation, the state, the father. This personage imposes on him translation into their own language, and that's the first act of violence. So in fact, while asking people to speak our language, we are even implying violence on them. So from here comes actually the initial motivation to kind of show how hospitality, the embedded violence in the term hospitality, and to also show how this reflects in urban space. And then also to twist the narrative a bit and take it further. And here, well, in this conversation in general, I use the term migrants. I'm not getting into the legal terminology. But basically how, let's say, for the lack of a better way of talking about different ownership or belonging, senses of belonging to a certain place, between citizens and migrants, or between citizens alike and migrants alike, how do these relationships of hospitality kind of reflect themselves on urban space? So it's both about the government, just like in Derrida's saying, but also among different roles of hosts and guests, let's say. So from there, we actually, I actually started researching different spaces of hospitality within the city of Istanbul, looking at neighborhoods that are recently emptied out, evacuated for several reasons of urban transformation that kind of started to host migrant people, or the case of a detention center that is about ghosting people. You know, that is the last space that a person will see before they are deported. Or in another case, a football stadium that becomes a space of hospitality, actually, where, again, there is a possibility of continuous hosting within all the complexity of hospitality brings forward in the football stadium with the Migrant Football League in Istanbul, where you see different people from different backgrounds coming together, different nations from the larger African continent in this case, 12 teams set up and playing with each other and creating a space of hospitality among the citizens alike and migrants alike. Or in another case, looking at the names of streets given by migrants within the city and make it visible to the host. So on and so forth. So there were several, one more example, a temporary summer camp becoming a migrant camp, again in Istanbul. And these works were all started to be researched by me, but then also kind of inviting several other people to the conversation. So they're also not all realized by me in the end. So this way, yeah, I mean, the whole idea was basically, and this is kind of ongoing, not only in Istanbul, but in other places, in Hong Kong, in Melbourne, in Calais, in Lesbos, Plovdiv, Bulgaria, in different places, let's say, around, let's say, Europe, or Fortress Europe, shall we say, but also in other places in the world, looking at the idea of hospitality, because yes, I started with the motivation or with the provocation of this hijacking of the term, but also actually if we look elsewhere, we see the same term being implemented by governments or by other, again, let's say, hosts alike in different contexts. So from there, it kind of moved on because of all the, let's say, connections and the friendships that were made during this research. The idea was to continue with the kitchen. I'm skipping the in-between story for the sake of time, But the kitchen, around 2015, actually, during this research was ongoing, the kitchen was started by myself and several other women living in Gaziantep, in the southern city of Turkey, that borders Aleppo and Syria. So the kitchen was very much, let's say, a space of solidarity, a space where also immediate help, support is also provided in the form of food in this case. It was really a space where a certain economy could be provided for the women working there. And then it also continued as its essential aim to be a space for creating ideas about living together. So this was also an assertion at the time, I shouldn't claim ownership of the statement, it was an assertion at the time by several civil society and citizens from Turkey insisting that we want to live together. And this was a continuous insistence, and it is still a continuous insistence that we want to live together. So how is it possible? How is it possible to live together? Again, how is it possible to, let's say, cancel the host and guest, or make it continuous, or make it unconditional, or make it or enable a space where we can be hosts and guests to each other. So the kitchen, the kitchen itself has it was basically around the floor table. A floor table that is in circular form, which is, let's say, 30 centimeters elevated from the floor, and everybody sits around it. And it's the floor table, I mean, it makes me think of Marcel Mauss and the relationship to the chair. Again, objects open up this discussion and conversation always. It's very interesting. That's maybe the one thing that's interesting about them, talking about design biennials. So chairs, Marcel Mauss talks about the chairs in the way they relate to, that he kind of compares with this still very colonial ethnographic understanding to me, but which is still interesting, where he talks about the chair in the Indian context and the British context, and he kind of compares the two societies to each other, how the Indians sit with or without the chair, and how the British sit with the chair. And I have to say, the story of the floor table in Turkey, again, is a very, let's say, parallel story. The floor table is the one that you find in the village, not in the city. The floor table is the one you find in the squatting, informal neighborhoods, not in the formal city. The floor table is not for the citizen. It's not for the modern society. It is for the one that needs to be modernized. It is the one that needs to learn how to be modern. It is for the one how to learn to be a good citizen. The floor table is for the one that comes from the rural, uneducated, and something to be ashamed of, honestly. So how do you, talk about this? Or how do you turn this table is maybe the question. But then we also saw so we basically, every citizen needs to learn to sit at the high table with a chair and to use cutlery and, proper eating manners and so on. And this was civilization. This is civilization. This is being modern. But what we saw, which was interesting, again, with the recent understanding of the understanding of the modern or postmodern, or however we call it, the floor table came back with the new elite. The floor table became something to be proud of. The floor table became something to be continuity of tradition. The floor table became something to be, something to receive our guests at. So then this time, part of the society which wasn't sitting at the floor table became the others, or the one that are excluded, or the one that are, shamed or pushed away, and the ones who were sitting around the floor table were now the owners of culture, history, citizenship, and so on. or the right to host. So the idea of doing the floor table, just like that 30 centimeter high, the traditional floor table, but using it within the kitchen as the women coming from different backgrounds, in this case was, killing that appropriation. But it is also killing the other table too. It's kind of like, And from here I'll jump to another quote and transition to another quote, and that will be the end of my story. Ulus Baker, a Cypriot philosopher and sociologist, talks about architecture of proximities, architecture of intervals, actually. And he talks about two things that determines architecture of proximity or spatial proximity. He talks about, one, the space the proximity that sits between two subjects. So he insists on the term subject. So not necessarily, they don't have to be people, humans. They can also be non-humans, but with an agency. And then the other is the principle of participation. So proximity and participation are the two things that determine architecture of proximity. And here, maybe with the floor table and in relation to the kitchen, we can actually bring up the notion of proximity and participation. And with that participation, for the women in the kitchen, in terms of taking decisions together, in terms of disagreeing, in terms of, a discussion that is productive and hosting each other, and creating a space of solidarity in all ways, both physical, digital, transnational. And this way, let's say, creating a space of continuous hosting, let's say. So that shall be my proposal for this evening, and thank you all very much for listening.
Thanks a lot. I think maybe to start, because Marina, you kind of raised the stakes quite high in the beginning. So before I ask you, so did we come closer to the idea of unconditional hospitality with these examples? I just want to say, of course, for me, it's super interesting with architecture that somehow things become very concrete. So in art, to the utopian space, you don't really have to prove it. You can develop it in theory and so on. With architecture, in the end, at least when it's realized and not just a model or even in the model already, it becomes concrete. It becomes also compromised. I mean, with all these examples, of course, we would find pitfalls to it. So since when you demand unconditional hospitality, did we get closer to it, and what would be the way to get closer to it?
Good question. It's not that I demand. I think there is already existing. So Derrida was saying that it was almost impossible, and I say that there are ways in which there is unconditional hospitality. And I was trying to raise 3 points. One, that human bodies are not only human, so we are multiple. Therefore, the category of the human that is at the center of architecture doesn't apply, and therefore we are a space of multiple, like hosting each other, like different beings. The other was time, that this idea of progress that generally applies also to the idea we conceive architecture. And I was trying to think about other cosmologies in which, temporalities are collapsing. And that happens already for at least many societies think in that way. And then I was thinking about the question of property. And while you ask me, I will prefer a society in which property is not something in the hands of few people. And I've been working with squatters in the Netherlands for a long time. So for me, these questions are already examples of opening up. Obviously, we have talked about tables and doors and windows and chairs and air. And those are also spaces that, maybe could be even further developed, rethought according to these terms. I was not referring to you when I was looking at white masculinity subject. I think your architecture, for instance, to be very concrete, I think the ways in which you occupy a space with your, these temporary spaces, you challenge many times the the preconceived idea of ownership of that space. You literally occupy. And the question of open university is also an idea of like openness. The projects that you were describing are talking about permeability, porosity. I was bringing it to maybe the space of to start with the body, to say sometimes we imagine that we are a sealed entity, and we are not, we are porous. And what happens if that idea of porosity brings in a scale? So it's maybe a kind of, seems a bit radical, but in a way we're trying to say, I'm not requesting it, it's already there. And what if we think about architecture through these other paradigms? What will be then architecture when you think about more than human, multiple spaces and time, so the rights of future generations? So you don't build for now, but to respect and honor the past and the present and the future. And yeah, property, I guess, is something that many people get very nervous about it. So, but yeah, I also question that architects or architecture takes for granted the question of ownership. Does it respond a little bit?
Maybe to continue in this vein with project you mentioned, both of you, that both of you worked with the idea of the kitchen is probably also not a surprise. I mean, it's a good example, and it's also in a way a popular example, also expanding to all the notion of food that has become more important again in recent years. But what I was wondering, like, maybe you already started a bit, but maybe you can expand, and then also you, Benny, like how the kitchen, the concrete kitchen, and the situation, and the concrete and the symbolic floor table from a rather small group in a household and people meeting there, how it connects to the outside, or how it can be scaled up in a way, or how is it in networking in a bigger scale, or is it something that stays in also as a metaphor in a smaller space?
In this case, the kitchen was almost natural to start from, because like as a woman, also your space is seen as in the kitchen, and it relates to motherhood, it relates to caring, and all that. But in a way, there's also, the idea of the public kitchen or the communal kitchen or the common kitchen, which is also very much embedded in the culture of the Fertile Crescent, that region that includes Gaziantep and Aleppo and others. The kitchen is very much everybody comes together to eat together. And the floor table, is then very practical, because you just put it on the floor and you gather around it. It doesn't have to be a permanent object that sits in the middle of the space. It comes in, you eat, and you put it away. Or if you want to gather around it, you gather around it, you talk, and then you put it away, fold it easily, hang up on the wall, and so on. So the kitchen is, very much the space of sharing the food and the space of creating new ideas in that sense, because once you are all together, you are also talking and discussing and sharing and so on. And in this case, it was also really a very practical and pragmatic and straightforward way as women to come together and to cook and to even sell it and make money for the space and so on. I don't know if I can easily talk about how it would grow or go elsewhere. In the case of this kitchen, for instance, continuously the people are coming and going, because also they are like moving, they are running away to Germany, Sweden, so it's also, the kitchen very much stays, the people come and go. And I would suggest the kitchen then as a metaphor that kind of repeats elsewhere with other potentials and other capacities, and maybe leads to other things.
Because in a way, the kitchen is, of course, it works and completely makes sense. On the other hand, with this, often the kitchen is also something that sets a lot of has a lot of thresholds or limitations in a way. From starting from what food is being served, from who can sit on the floor. I mean, but also a lot of it implies rules of how to behave. So it's in a way both. And there's, I mean, Conflict Kitchen was kind of like addressing the idea. There's a lot of conflicts around, or that can be also shown around the situation in the kitchen. So that's maybe like this ambivalence that it creates an open space, but still it also limits it in many ways.
Can I say something and throw the ball at you in this way? I mean, you were mentioning, for instance, in the dome, how the shell is transparent and you see the outside, which I liked a lot in terms of, so you're inside and outside. It also kind of creates that kind of intermediary, that shell. But then also you were saying that you become the curators of that space. So the kitchen the space maybe is the same, but what you kind of recreate it continuously through the activities.
It's not so easy to say something interesting and new about the kitchen, right? Because just that it serves a basic need, and that on the other side, there's so many aspects of all the questions that are all the big questions that are in the air and that we have to deal with, makes the kitchen, of course, a super good place to actually try out something that we are all more or less incapable to do, and that is trans-epistemic experience. How do you work together, and how do we come together? How do we communicate together in a sustainable way, in a way that that relates to cultural backgrounds, that relates to age and taste and so on. So there's so many things in it that I think the kitchen cannot be avoided. That's one thing. The other thing, this is what we experience in the Floating University, that putting the kitchen in a central place also makes it. You not only have to deal with cooking and eating, but you also have to deal with doing the dishes and where's the food coming from, and where is it going after. So that all the question of compost and how do you import? What kind of choice do you make in the supermarket, or where do you get the food? This is all super good to look very close to it in a collective way, because of course everybody does that at home. But if you have to do it together, then all these different backgrounds and feelings and ways that you perceive all these questions of vegan, vegetarian, gluten-free, they come together in one space and produce you can say a conflict or an opportunity for debate. That's one thing. And then, of course, there's also this moment of when everybody's eaten and leaning back and just drinking the last bottles of wine out, that there is this kind of this moment of being relaxed and where suddenly a different form of communication can start. That's also great about it. So this is the way that we're trying to use it without making it too much. We are not trying to make it too much a topic. We're just using it like we use space, or that we think it's necessary to look at material in a circular way and so on, without, but just doing it that way. But we're still talking about all the big issues that need to be tackled as well. And it's just a good transport vehicle.
I think I mean, in a way, you mentioned the concept of pre-enactment also with the Latour project, which we talked also in the series with with Oliver Marchart and others about, and that's, of course, the kitchen seems to be a good place for that, like training, pre-enacting possible situations, learning a different way of interacting. So I think that is very much makes sense. But then the other thing I was wondering about is, I mean, with your projects now with Floating University, there's a continuation, and of course some projects are, as you said, they want it again and again, but there's a certain temporality to a lot of these projects. They are not meant necessarily to be there forever. They are different from architecture in the sense that it's not built and then it should be like like a dome or a cathedral, and then it stands for 500 years. And I wonder that maybe this relates to this dilemma or paradox of hospitality also, that maybe in a temporary way it becomes more clear, it's like more performed, it's more active, has to be renewed all the time. So this paradox of what is unconditional hospitality and what are the rules that we actually might need also to live together can be performed differently than being built in concrete. But still, I guess there's a need, a desire to make, I mean, not only for architects, even your special cases in that, but there's a desire to make things, or also need to make things sustainable, to change infrastructure, etc. in a way, I guess. So what do you see these relations between these projects and making things sustainable? I don't know. For example, the Center of Spatial Justice that you work in is maybe one example, but I would be interested in how do things also last, or should they last?
I like this subject of sustainability and talking about it, especially in a theater, right? Because what is the sustainability of us being here and talking about this? It's on one side, it's that we're discussing this because somehow we have the urge and we see the need that these things need to be discussed and have to be put somehow on a stage, and then the audience is coming because they think it might, give an inspiration somehow, or change a little bit the perspective that they have on a certain aspect of the world, and then they go out and they have it or they don't have it, and for me, I think this is a very sustainable act because it sustains with us. And it sustains with the people that come here. And this is also the way that I see this, the temporality and this aspect of an architecture that doesn't say, "Hey, I'm here and I know exactly what's the right thing for this urban situation, and now I build it because I also have the money and I know the guy who owns it." And then now we do it, and then it's there, and you have to deal with it. But it's very much more addressing all the dilemmas that we are in. That actually, if we think about them the right way, we have no fucking idea what's the right thing to do, right? We don't know which buildings to build and what they should look like and where they should go and what would be right, because we don't know about tomorrow, and we don't know who's going to be in the government tomorrow. We don't know if the borders close or open, and we don't know what new pandemics are coming and climate change and so on. We don't know all these things. So I think it's in that sense it's a good way to be sustainable in a sense that we experiment and we propose things and then we discuss them and we look at them and we think like, could this be a way to react? And luckily, for example, the Floating University turned out to be super sustainable in times of Corona, because suddenly you don't have walls and the air is everywhere. You can go there. There's no problem for everybody. You don't have all the problems that you have in a space like this.
I agree. In like the idea of the temporality, I think, is very productive. As you said, like that brings the notion that everything has to be negotiated and renegotiated all the time. And I think that's very healthy for architecture, for cities, for governments, institutions in general, that there is this possibility of porosity, of permeability, of things that might change. And that is a way in which we can conceive architecture. Yeah, I imagine the floating university is all the time in transformation because things happen, maybe things are damaged, you need to maintain a little bit something that it changed. So it's actually another fiction. Like, first of all, the fiction of like you can own a space, and the other is a fiction that things are fixed and, last forever. They have to be taken care and maintained. So there is an ongoing transformation of millions of instances of negotiation and agreements between different parties. And when we think about architecture in that way, I think it's a bit more, let's call it sustainable. And the problem is that, we need big ideas for the future. But perhaps that is an idea for the future, a certain form of precarity, and I'm using this term knowing that it's a problematic one, but things that don't have to be completely fixed because they need to be reassessed continuously. And too often we are very fascinated of things that stand very proudly, and I'm very scared of those. I think that, when we talk about vulnerability, it's not just care that have become very commonplace terms. I think there is something interesting about that in relation to architecture, that imagining that these spaces, buildings, cities, there's about that. Care, renegotiation, transformation, continue, have been always about that. And only fascists have dreams of lasting forever. That's the truth. That's the architecture that is all for posterity. It's a fascist architecture.
I don't know if I should say something on top of this. It was so good. But I mean, maybe the one thing that I can mention again was the last part of my talk, the proximity and participation, which kind of complies with both of the comments here. Proximity, like the fact that we can actually sit here together, or we can share what we know and what we feel and what we think. And then also this way we participate actually in the making of something, and maybe that's something we don't know. But we kind of anticipate or hope. The one thing that I wanted to say in relation to also this kind of temporariness of the space, the kitchen, for instance, it started in the ground floor of a cultural space in the city. But then with Corona, because we can't gather again, the floor table was taken out and brought to other spaces where, then it became kitchen elsewhere. And then that space was given away to some of the new migrants coming in who are looking for a place for free. So it's, I mean, in that sense, I don't know it is the right thing to say, but the architecture is not important at all. Not important at all. It's the possibility of creating that space continuously, and this way sustaining the space is the thing.
What I think is we have to see this process as architecture. So we have to. It's a spatial practice that you're doing, and spatial practice is architecture, and we have to separate that from the built environment, maybe, or however you want to call it, but the walls and floors and ceiling stuff that is maybe not so relevant in the first place. Of course it is, because let's face it, cool architecture is just nice to be in, and it also changes the way that we behave. But it's not at the first place anymore.
It's an example, perhaps, because, I mean, it's an utopian, a dystopian example. But if you think about an artist, Constant, but also that was very much connected to architecture, who designed New Babylon. New Babylon was precisely an architecture for radical hospitality, as Mark Wigley puts it, but it was an architecture for a society that it was not organized around labor, but around play, And therefore, it was an architecture that was continuously being redefined, where everyone was an architect. There were no architects because everyone could define the space. And there were no doors and there were no windows. There were only unlimited ways in which everyone will define their own space. And it was really kind of a precarious, a temporary act because it will be challenged and redefined by the others trying to do the space. And it became, and that's the pity, it started as a very utopian idea of the world, of society. And Constant, as he started working on the project and inhabiting the project, realized that it was also a very violent project. So let's be honest. A kind of unconditional hospitality, if any, that exists in many ways, is not necessarily something that we can achieve without certain struggle. And that you can see the image of New Babylon where, there are like bodies that are being subjected to violence because that idea of like challenging the borders or challenging the space of each other, it brings a struggle, it brings conflict. But the question is it worth it still to try and to imagine that type of a space?
I think that relates a bit also again to the idea of the pre-enactment, and like in Occupy Wall Street or in all these occupations, if you're really open and homeless people come in and so on, I mean, there was a lot of problems, a lot of violence also within the camps that had to be dealt with. But as you said, it maybe was a way of confronting this and trying to find ways to deal with. But I was thinking like also because before we were talking a bit about the architectural biennial in Venice, which was rather disappointing but I think it has to do with what you were addressing, there's a need for I forgot the exact words how you put it, but there's for ideas or for something to move on. But at the same time, maybe dealing with temporary processes is the only way of doing it at the moment. And a lot of these architectural proposals still try to want to build something, but then it seems like they feel, we can't do this anymore. And then halfway it gets stuck. Before opening also to other questions, I still would maybe, even though without a question related to it, could you talk a bit about the Center of Spatial Justice, without direct connection, but I think it would be important to also have it in the room.
I mean, we were a bunch of people working for the Ranter earthquake victims of 1999 earthquake in Marmara region in Turkey. And we were basically altogether a bunch of, let's say, architects, designers, engineers, lawyers, trying to prepare a project that can be built, because the Ranter earthquake victims went on a struggle for like 20 years to get the rights to the land with like as if it is public housing, and they won the court case. It was a court case, big court case, because in Turkey the law only protects the owner and not the renter. So the renters are practically homeless, and they win the court case to the right to the land and to the right to a shelter. And then we come in as, let's say, so-called professionals to prepare their project, their housing project. And in this process, working volunteers, we kind of got to know each other better, and we started the Center for Spatial Justice. Also by joining other friends, let's say. I keep using the term friends. I mean, it's all really based on friendship. And then that's how it started in 2015, again, around the same time that I was actually in Turkey working on vocabulary of hospitality. And the idea of spatial justice came up from this very beginning of this housing project, because justice is something that we can't necessarily, unfortunately, prove with law anymore, that we can't necessarily base on the rule of the legal space, but justice is the one that is needed to live all together again, in a given context. Spatial justice in that sense is social, is environmental, and related to the human. but an understanding of human that is, beyond the human that we understand now, or the understanding of humanity that is beyond the understanding of humanity as we see now. So that, that's how it started. So there are a lot of there's a lot of research project in it going on, but also action projects. There was like a neighborhood vocabulary, again, dictionary. The idea is to kind of try to be in connection, in solidarity with different contexts. In this case, that relate the center to the periphery, to, let's say, housing struggles, to environmental struggles that are predominantly in Turkey, about rivers, dams, mining, but also, social struggles, for instance, or the violent urban transformation processes that are going on in the cities. It is a collective effort, so we go in and out as we work with it. There are also some people who come in to work, literally, they are not part of the collective or the NGO, but they come in to work in different projects. So, I try to keep it short, but yeah.
No, thank you. But I think the term, it's important as a project, but also the term of spatial justice is maybe good to have in the air with what we are talking about. I don't know, does someone of you have a comment or a question?
Yeah, thank you so much for your ideas. But I'd just like to know, how would you analyze the situation in this room now? The so-called stage and the so-called audience and the table with chairs. So how would you analyze it through your theories and ideas?
No, I would like to refer back to what Benjamin said earlier, the sustaining of the conversation. So in that sense, it's a rare opportunity actually to come together in person. Beyond that, maybe this, for instance, the light and so on, it's maybe not so good ideal, let's say, if we sit on us in a circle without talking from there, for instance, these would be all of us sitting in the same level. Maybe this is more food. Wine would be great. I'm using antibiotics, but yeah. But yeah, that would be an evaluation. But I think in the end it is really about the conversation itself. So as long as you can identify with it and you have some comments on it, and if it provoked you also to certain direction of thought, then I think it's still a good one.
I can maybe also, since I'm responsible for the setup to a degree, we're talking about assemblies in this series, and we have a very frontal setup, which on one hand came through the logic that it very early moved online, and we didn't want to give up on the online audience, which, to be honest, is slightly bigger than the one here tonight. But it also is in the context of assembly that I was actually, because also being part of a lot of projects with different approaches and also collaborating, for example, with Benny and others, for me it's a rather unusual format, but I have found it actually there's also something about a certain honesty, especially in the art and the theater space, and I find a lot of assembly situations that are created, and they pretend to be open. They have wine and have a round table, but for me it's also in the context of working within the art field, but close to certain activist movements, it's important to also show the difference. So sometimes I prefer a rather rigid, even maybe a little bit violent situation as a curatorial choice than pretending it is something else. So it has to do with that. And the other thing is that after many years of different kind of situation, I also started enjoying sometimes a straightforward lecture, which I just have to listen to. But of course, I think the thing is that of course it provokes this question in the context when there is written assembly and you sit in the half dark. It's an obvious. No, it's an obvious question. It's good, and especially today it has to be asked. So thanks a lot for that.
I will say that. There is always someone that is not in the room, no? That was like the core also of this architecture of hospitality. That is the potential of someone else joining unexpectedly and that you have to host. So as complicated this setting might be, it is also connected to the fact that we have a camera and we have a live stream, and therefore we have to account for a stranger that will be at the other side listening. And therefore that's why there are these lights and microphones. And, sometimes the position, like architecture, completely changes by just having a camera. If we wouldn't have that, probably this setting would have already shifted, and we'll have agreed that we can sit differently. But that's the core of hospitality, that there is a possibility of someone just join right now in the space, and it's late, and lost most of it, but it's still, or that's someone that none of us know, and we will never know that is also listening. And yeah, that's what it is.
And so it really creates a strange situation, I must say, for me, because before things were streamed, but I would still say, yeah, we're in the theater and there's a stream, and I would forget about it. Because this kind of had to start as a stream, it changed a bit. So for me, suddenly there's an audience in my mind that I'm co-addressing, which I wouldn't have before with a normal stream. And at the same time, it's not a TV studio where the audience is just a prop, so there's still about some, so it is actually something that also, for me, what kind of architecture of inside, outside this is.
But isn't it beautiful? Like as a question, say, okay, we try to be hospitable to each other, and like we are part of each other because we are breathing each other, we are hosting each other, but how to always be addressing you and recognizing you, and at the same time speaking of the other that is not yet, or we don't even see. So that, I think that's the core of the question, right? And for me, that's hospitality. Or that's at the core of the idea of hospitality. Always recognizing that might be another person that is not in the room, and that you are addressing while you are addressing the person that is in front of you.
Well, thank you, Marina. I think that was a beautiful last sentence to end this conversation. So thanks to you all. Thanks to Merve Bedir, Benjamin Foerster-Baldenius, and Marina Otero Verzier. Thank you all for listening to this podcast. And I would just like to invite you also already to our next edition on December 15th, 2021 at 7 p.m. CET. We will have to move online again because Austria is already in a shutdown, and it seems like the situation is getting worse again. So we will be on a live stream together with Frédéric Aituati and Company & Co. on the topic of Parliaments of Things and Beings on December 15th at 7 p.m. And if you want, please check out our website with lots of material and other information. Thank you all for listening, and hope to see you again.
Brut, New Art on Stage.